What country is one of the world's largest exporters of crude oil and the largest in the Western Hemisphere? What country is one of the original founders of OPEC? Well, the answer is Venezuela. I'm glad you could join us today as we will talk about Venezuela and its past, present, and future of its oil and economy. My name is Connor, and I'm here with my colleagues today, Grant, Megan, and Quinn. Today, Megan will be discussing the detailed history of the Venezuelan oil and their economy. Grant will be discussing Hugo Chavez and his influence on Venezuela with regards to oil. Quinn will be discussing the present state of the economy in Venezuela, and I will be talking about the future and the predictions of where the Venezuelan economy is going.
In 1914, the Mana Grande oil field was discovered under the presidency of Juan Gomez. Then the first commercial drilling of petroleum in Venezuela took place in 1917. The industry proved extremely lucrative to the scores of foreign companies that drilled Venezuela crude because of the country's low wages and taxes policies. OPEC is a permanent intergovernmental organization created at the Baghdad Conference on September 10, 1960 by Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. OPEC had its headquarters in Switzerland in the first 5 years of its existence, but it was moved to Vienna, Austria on September 1, 1965. The CVP that was created in 1960 was transformed into PDVSA, which had the power to coordinate, program, and control the activities of newly nationalized oil industry. In 1977, the government created PDVSA to serve as the umbrella organization for 4 major petroleum-producing affiliates.
At the time of Chavez's election, OPEC had lost much of its influence compared to when it was first created. A combination of OPEC members, including Venezuela, regularly ignoring quotas, and non-OPEC countries such as Mexico and Russia beginning to expand in their own petroleum industries resulted in record low oil prices, to which hurt the Venezuelan economy. One of Chavez's main goals as president was to combat this problem by re-strengthening OPEC and getting countries to once again abide by their quotas. Chavez personally visited many of these leaders of oil-producing nations around the world, and in 2000, he hosted the first summit of the heads of state of OPEC in 25 years. This was the second ever meeting. The goals of this meeting, which was held in Caracas, included recuperating the credibility of Venezuela and OPEC, defending oil prices, consolidating relations between Venezuela and the Arab Islamic world, and to strengthen OPEC in general. The meeting could be considered a success given the record high oil prices of the present, but it should be noted that much of this also was a consequence of the September 11, 2001 attacks against the United States, the Iraq War, and the significant increase in demand for oil from developing economies like China and India, all of which helped prompt a surge in oil prices to levels far higher than those targeted by OPEC during the preceding period. In addition to these events, the December 2002 oil strike in Venezuela, which resulted in a loss of about 3 million pounds of crude oil production, brought a sharp increase in the world prices of crude, but that still had not been relented by 2005. Chavez began setting goals of reinstating quotas, such as 10% of PDVSA's annual investment budget was to be spent on social programs. He also changed tax policies in the oil revenues collection process. Chavez initiated many of these major changes to exert more control over PDVSA and efficiently deal with the problems he and his supporters had over PDVSA's small revenue contributions to the government. However, strictly adhering to these policies was not immediately welcomed by PDVSA, because for the last few decades they had been focused on producing as much oil as possible. Then, in December 2002, PDVSA officially went on strike, creating a near-complete halt on the oil production in Venezuela. The aim of the Venezuelan general strike of 2002 to 2003 was to pressure Chavez into resigning and calling early elections. The strike lasted approximately 2 months, and the government ended up firing 19,000 PDVSA employees and replacing them with workers loyal to the Chavez government. When the strike ended, substantial macroeconomic damage had been done with employment up by 5%. This increase brought the country to a national unemployment peak of over 20% in March of 2003.
Looking at Venezuela in terms of energy consumption, this country has derived a good amount of its energy from oil consumption, 38% to be exact. Today, the petroleum sector is of central importance to the economy of Venezuela. Venezuela, in fact, is one of the world's largest exporters of crude oil and the largest in the Western Hemisphere. In 2013 alone, Venezuela was the third largest exporter of crude oil to the United States. In fact, Venezuela has consistently been ranked a top supplier of crude oil to the United States. Subsequently, the oil sector accounts for a large portion of Venezuela's export revenues and gross domestic product. In particular, oil accounts for more than 3/4 of total Venezuelan export revenues, about half of total government revenues, and approximately 1/3 of total gross domestic product. When looking at the oil industry in terms of reserves, Venezuela contains some of the largest oil and natural gas proven reserves in the world. The development of the Orinoco Belt could prove to put Venezuela on top in the international petroleum stage. The Orinoco Belt, a 55,000 square kilometer area, contains 256 billion barrels of recoverable crude, with oil accounting for 95% of the country's export earnings and 55% of the federal budget. The production of these huge tar sand-like crudes could stimulate the Venezuelan economy. Despite its being one of the largest petroleum producers in the world, Venezuela's production and economy has declined slightly in the past few years. In 2013, the U.S. Energy Information Administration estimates that Venezuela produced 2.49 million barrels per day of petroleum. This declination in production level owes largely to human capital losses from the 2002-2003 strike and the allotting of revenues to social programs to bolster the administration, rather than being invested into petroleum production. Indeed, these problems have resulted in unprecedented changes for the Venezuelan petroleum industry. Venezuela, an OPEC nation with the world's largest oil reserves, has begun to import crude for the first time in its history. A possible cause of this importing of crude and recent declination in production levels could be the current socialist government's inept oil management in recent years. Inept government management, along with other factors, may be the cause of the recent downward spiral of the Venezuelan economy brought about by the retardation of production within the Venezuelan oil sector.
Alright, ready, set, go.
When looking at what the future holds for Venezuela and its oil-driven economy, it doesn't look good for the Venezuelans. Oil accounts for 95% of the nation's exports. It is no surprise that when the world price of oil drops significantly, that it will damage the Venezuelan economy. Citizens are unhappy, and some small riots have already broken out in 2014, with more to come in 2015. Everyday supplies, such as toilet paper and toothpaste, are scarce. There have even been reports that hospitals do not have the adequate supplies to treat patients. On top of this, massive inflation has already set in. President Nicolas Maduro's popularity is at an all-time low. In addition to the world drop in oil prices, there is another problem for Venezuela. The implementation of the Keystone Pipeline in the United States could drastically affect the Venezuelans' sale of their oil. The Keystone Pipeline will allow oil from Canada and the Midwest to reach refineries in Texas and Louisiana. As a result, the U.S. will not need to buy crude oil from Venezuela. Venezuela will lose one of its main buyers, and its economy will be drastically affected. We have discussed the past, present, and future of the Venezuelan petroleum industry. We hope you learned a little bit about this country and its oil industry. Thank you, and thanks for watching.